Ach, up, ach, up, ach. Oh, wang, 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 wang. Good morning. My name is Chris Fox, and today we're talking about how to write fantasy battles, epic fantasy battles, especially, which is something that I absolutely love and I have a lot of experience with. I think there are a lot of considerations that as writers we don't necessarily know about that are unique to fantasy battles. That aren't present if you're writing, the modern day or you're doing science fiction. And we're going to go through a lot of that stuff. I want to go over some of what I call rules. I mean, I don't know if you'll consider them to be rules, but the rules that I follow. And you'll see how they're helpful. I want to talk about some questions you need to answer about the battle before you get started. And then the second half of the video, we're going to go through one of the battles that I'm running in an existing novel that I'm writing. So it's like, gosh, I don't even know how long now. I want to say like 7 chapters total. So about 15,000 words of the novel is this battle, the lead up to it and the battle itself. And so I'll show you sort of point by point how I did that battle, how I orchestrated it, and how I used the various rules that you're about to learn, and then of course how I answered the questions. So we'll start with the rules. The first rule is that stakes trump action. And I would say that, I'm not going to number these rules, but if there was a most important one, maybe this is it. So action is good, but if we just have people that are fighting for no reason and you've got archers that are lobbing arrows into infantry, and that's kind of interesting. But if we don't know why those people are getting shot, or who they are, or what unit they're in, or what will happen if they fail, all of these things are going to lessen the power of your battle. And so in fantasy, you've usually got this huge lead up where you're learning about what's going to happen and how bad things can go if this battle is lost. Maybe the city is going to be annihilated, or maybe the Dark Lord is going to win. Whatever the stakes are, we make sure that the reader knows what they are. And as combat goes on, we want to keep ratcheting those up. So you'll see as my combat plays out that it just keeps going up and up and up. The tension gets more and more and more. Things are going worse and worse and worse for our protagonist. He's having a tougher time. People are dying around him, and you are seeing this occur. You see how lethal the situation he is in is, and then at any point he can just die. That's critical. And so as you're building your combat, always remember stakes trump action. The next rule is that you want to do strategy, not turns. So one of the common mistakes that I see in combat for battles that you can get away with in writing a duel or writing any sort of fight scene is turns. So like this character does this, then this character does that, then this character does this, then this character does that. You can't really do that and just sort of have a slugfest between two units. If you've got two groups of cavalry, you can't just have them charge, start beating each other up and describe it that way and have the reader be interested. Nor would you, because you need something plausible. You need to understand enough about how the strategy of your world will work that you're prepared to run the battle. So, as an example, I mean, I guess the real example is going to come in the second half of the video when we see the combat that I will show. We'll go through my combat. I'll show you the strategy that is going into that combat and how it's not just turns and relating. The enemy does this, we do this, the enemy does that. We'll show how not to do that. Units, not numbers. So one of the things that I see often in fantasy that's very confusing, and I see this in science fiction too. If you just say X number of troops, there are 10,000 of these troops, there are 100,000 of these troops. That's kind of pointless and meaningless in the reader's head. It doesn't really tell them anything. So what you need to do instead is give them a unit. So let's think about the Roman legion as a great example. If you say it's the 11th legion or some famous legion and they've got this storied history, and you have the person who's talking about the legion impart this, and then they start talking about various different parts of the legion. There's archers and auxiliaries and cavalry and infantry, and we're learning more about it. By the time the 11th goes into combat, you know the capabilities of this legion, what they can do, who these people are, what the different parts are. And so it's not just, it's 6,000 people. It's a Roman legion. And you get a chance to show that on the page. So that's what you want to try to encapsulate. And part of the other reason for that is if you're approaching it like units, then it's easier to describe the combat. You can tell people where a specific unit is in the combat. Unit A attacks Unit B, and because they know all about both of these units, they know that each one of them has specific, capabilities. Maybe a cavalry is charging infantry, then they know what's going to happen to that poor infantry if the cavalry catches them out. Now, in my world, I'm introducing magic on top of that. So if we then have airships up in the sky that are lobbing fireballs down on the infantry, things are even worse. So you need to understand what the units are. And I think there's not a good fantasy show that I can really point to that's going to do this for me, but there are shows that exist. I would use Black Sails as a great example. So not quite fantasy, it's more of a pirate show. But what you see continuously as you're watching this show is every ship is known. We know who the captain is. We know what that ship's rough capabilities is, how many guns it has, how fast it can move. And so the more we see, the more we learn about these ships, they become entities in your readers or your audience's head where they sort of understand everything about it. It's not such a ship. You're not just describing, 12 galleons attacked us. It's, the Rake or, Blackbeard's X or whatever the ship is. You're describing things that over the course of your narrative, you've built up in the reader's head. So you demonstrate the power of some of these ships, and now you're getting to show them in combat. And the reader can keep track of them much easier as a placeholder in their head. So instead of just saying, there's a mass of figures, fighting another mass of figures, I know this ship, and this ship are fighting this ship, and a bunch of dudes. So it's really making it easier, I think, in your reader's head by giving them specific units. Do I have any more rules to relate? I do. Show the cost. So as the battle is progressing, you want to show people getting wounded, you want to show gear getting damaged, you want to show people dropping weapons, you want to show units getting forced back and territory changing. Oftentimes what I'll see is it's just a slugfest where you've got, certain people are smacking other people and they just keep smacking each other until one side runs out of people to smack. You really want to show that even if your side is the victor, there's probably a cost. People are dying. And depending on the type of series you're writing, maybe people aren't dying. Maybe that's too hardcore. Maybe you're not writing anything close to grimdark. But you have to decide what the costs are going to be, and there should be a cost. Otherwise, combat is boring. Combat without a cost, a known cost ahead of time, and a cost that is paid by the end of that battle by somebody, it's not impactful. And so if you're writing a fantasy battle, you must have an ultimate cost that is being paid that's known ideally to both the antagonist and to the protagonist, or multiple protagonists if there are some in the battle. All right. I also have 5 questions that you need to answer, so we're going to jump into that in the next section. Okay, so we know the basic rules of our fantasy combat. Now we need to start asking questions and defining things. So the first thing that we want to start with is the battlefield itself. The battlefield is going to be a character. Let's define it. Is it going to be your army is jumping another army? They've been ambushed on the bank of a river, and maybe half of the army's on one bank and half's on the other half, and they're trying to unite, but they can't. You've got some immediate stakes that are improved as a result of the terrain. What if they're fighting on a lava field and they're standing on some crust that could give way at any moment? Anything like that can be used. You get to decide exactly what the parameters of the battle are. Because we're doing fantasy, you can really go as far as you want. And you can have floating islands in the sky like in Avatar, whatever you want to do really, as long as it works and it fits your world. But you really want to start there. Where is this fight taking place and why there as opposed to somewhere else? Because that's going to answer a lot of your questions later. So again, what are the geographical features and where is the battle taking place? What's the battlefield like? Next, who are the major players in this combat? So I'm talking who are your generals, who are the major units that are taking place, and you're going to want a full roster. So maybe like we talked about earlier that we use units, not numbers. If we've already fleshed out in the reader's head what the units are, now all we have to do is show those units, where they're moving to, and who the leaders are and what they're doing. It's pretty straightforward. Well, this is our chance to make sure we've defined that list and we know who they are. If there's going to be conversation going on, if the general of an army is going to see half his army wiped out and is going to have a conversation about that, who is he having it with? This is your chance to define who that is. Once you've kind of, have a pretty good idea of the units that are involved and what the battlefield is, it's time to move into powers or abilities that are going to be instrumental in the combat. So if we're looking at historical fiction, if one side has access to the English longbow and can hit the other side at twice the range, what is that going to look like in practice? How is that going to affect how the battle plays out? In the case of Shattered Gods, the combat I'm writing, you've got airships that are descending from cloud cover, and they've got a whole bunch of mages on the decks, and each of these mages can cast fireballs. So you get dozens of fireballs that are raining down on enemy troops, and that's something that I get to describe. I need to know ahead of time what the Hosrin capabilities are. I need to know that airships exist, I need to know how they fly, how they work, what they're vulnerable to, and then as they descend from cloud cover, I need to know what sort of attacks they're going to launch, so that I can describe it appropriately. And you really want to capture kind of the majesty or the awesomeness of the abilities that you're describing. So if you have thousands of archers and are all firing flaming archers, take some time in describing that and really do some justice to these abilities, because the reader appreciates it for one thing, and it's also, I think, great in terms of just narrative care, because combat tends to slow down in the heads of a lot of people when you see 10,000 10,000 arrows blotting out the sky. Next, number 4, what twist or tactic is going to be employed in this battle? So is something going to happen that surprises the reader? How is that going to be introduced? And know it ahead of time, because you're going to be building up to it the whole time, so you have to set it up. So as an example, in the combat you're going to see in the last part of the video for Shattered Gods, I am describing this battlefield very carefully. So we've got Zal, and he's marching with this army, and they're coming up this pass, and I keep describing this cliff that looms over the trail. They keep looking up at the cliff, and he sees it, he gets closer, and he's noticing there's a bunch of cracks in it from the rain, these fissures that have formed. And so, of course, through the course of the combat, he's going to be forced up there, and then eventually he's going to figure out a way to destroy the cliff and collapse it on the enemy army. I mean, that's basically what I need to set up. So that's the twist that I need to set up. I know that everything I'm building in the combat is coming towards this moment where Zal's going to do this cool, heroic thing, my protagonist. So because I know ahead of time when the battle starts, this is what I'm working towards, it's easy to structure the narrative and foreshadow this sort of thing. So that's how I can have Zal look up and see and observe the things I need him to know ahead of time before he's actually in a position where he needs to do something. Otherwise, it feels forced. If I had forced him to the top of this cliff and then all of a sudden he has exactly what he needs and solves the problem, then the reader's going to question it. You needed to set it up earlier, and that's not possible to do if you haven't defined it. Lastly, you need to decide who's going to be the winner and what is the cost going to be. So you can say to yourself, okay, side A is going to win, but they're going to lose this, this, and this. And that's kind of the end goal that you're working towards. And you may find through the writing that, it actually plays out a little differently than what you originally intended. But having that intention will help you to plan out the battle. So I know going in that the Trash Legion that Zal is a part of is going to get wiped out. It gets wiped out every time they send it in there. This is something that going in. But I know that, and I had that defined. I just had to decide, okay, how is that going to happen? And I also had to define, does the Hosrin Armada that's coming down onto the clouds, do they take some damage too? And if so, what does that look like? And, who are the Fomori assaulting them with from the previous question, number 2, and how that plays out. So you really need to understand what victory looks like at the end of it. Because if you know the end of the battle, then the entire time you're writing it, you're working towards that end. It'll be easier to get there. So anyway, those are the rules. Those are the questions. The last part of the video, we'll just look at how I put them into effect in an actual battle. Okay, so here's kind of a walkthrough of the battle, and then we'll take a look in the Scrivener document, and I'll try to show you how I'm implementing this. So our main character is leaving via the front gate here. He's marching with the Trash Legion out into the wilderness, basically off to die. And so if we look at a larger map, love the detail here, guys. This is hand-drawn. So this is a sketch of the world. Let me zoom out just a bit. So this is that city that you just saw. He's marching out this way, and this is the site of the battle. And the reason the battle takes place here is because if the Hosrins set up here, and their enemies, the Fomori, these giants, march past them to the city, they can sally out and attack them from behind. So the Fomori have to deal with the city. They've got to deal with it, or I'm sorry, they have to deal with this pass and these mountains if people are here. And so this is where the Hosrins send their forces to kind of, set up their initial line of defense. This is where our protagonist is going. So this is me understanding the battlefield. Now, as we get closer to the battlefield, let's see what I can illustrate for you here. So this is a better representation of the battle itself, and I'll start zooming in a little bit. We're using a platform called Roll20, which I use to play games like Dungeons & Dragons and the Magitech Chronicles. but I can also model out battles for fantasy. So what we're looking at here are some of the players involved in this battle. First, we've got my main character, Zal, at the back of this legion. So he's got a legion of troops that he's a part of. The Trash Legion has been marching all the way up here. They are hungry. They are tired. The rain is falling. The weather is terrible. Visibility is bad. They don't have any equipment. Their feet are bleeding. I mean, it's as bad as it can really get. And monsters are now marching up the pass. And so you have a massive bear-headed bipedal figure with an army of bears, like grizzly bears, at his command. And then you also have a titanic, gargantuan creature that's half wasp, half person. I'm drawing off of the concept I saw in an animation, Japanese animation, back in the late 90s called Ninja Scroll. It absolutely terrified me. I have a phobia of wasps. And so the idea of a bunch of wasps bursting out of a hive in his back was just terrifying to me. So I thought, well, what if there was a giant creature like that? And so I made a giant creature. Now imagine you've got this giant creature marching up the pass, and this cloud of wasps is coming out. And they're all roughly the size of a human head, so big wasps. So these bears, and there are goatmen, and they crash into the Hosran ranks. So if we pan out and we look at the battlefield here, what's important when I say know the battlefield, you see these figures up here. This is supposed to be my PCs, my player characters, my protagonists. So what's going to happen is this legion's going to get forced backwards. And they've been warned by their teacher that if they want to live, they need to sneak around this area here. And then, so kind of, I'll trace their path. He's told them, come up this way and work your way up the cliff. And not many people live, but if you come up here on this cliff, then maybe you'll live. And what I've been describing through the whole book is that there's this overhang right here that overlooks the trail. And so if this overhang falls, everybody in this whole area is going to die. So the Legion's getting forced back. The heroes kind of escape around up here. They're still being attacked, and they're still dying, and they're still having a tough time of it, but they're doing better than the Legion down here. The wasps are swarming them, the bears are coming in, and eventually the Legion's getting wiped out, and all of our enemies have gathered right in this location. And now our main characters have sort of, crept to the edge here, and they're going down the cliff, and they manage to detach the cliff. They find a weak spot, which has already been predefined, and it collapses, and they fill in the pass, and they kill all of their enemies. Now, by this point, their Legion, unfortunately, is dead. All of their companions have been wiped out, and they're saved by the Hosran airships. But, I mean, I know this is just short, but this gives you just roughly what the battle is supposed to look like. Now, let's look at it in fiction. So you can see I have Chapter 18 as Wasps. My character is waking up and marching into combat and starting to see the Wasp monster for the first time. It's all set up. And he's just seeing it. They're not actually having to engage us. So they're standing there, that Legion standing at the mouth of the pass, and here comes the Wasps. Then he sees the bears. Bears are coming up too. And the bears and the Wasps are actually starting to assault the Legion. Now they're being attacked. Now Zal is in the back of this Legion, and so he's seeing what's happening, but he doesn't actually have to fight it himself yet. Now we've got our last stand. He's run, he and his friends. Now they're going up that cliff and trying to hide themselves as best they can so that they can survive. We flip over to a character up on one of the airships. We've been following Princess Lee from the beginning of the book. She's giving us the other half of the battle. We are seeing from her perspective what's going on in the air. And it's not good. They're losing. Things are not going as well as we're expecting them to go. And so, we're sort of ratcheting up the stakes as we see Hosra is surprised by how powerful these Fomori are, and they have no answer. So the Trash Legion is getting wiped out. That's, all of Zal's friends. The Air Force is taking a beating, and they don't know what to do. Well, Zal works his way all the way up to the cliff and says, okay, I'm not going to give up. I don't want to die. And so he climbs over the edge of the cliff as these bears are coming up to maul him and tear his friends apart, as they've done with other friends. They've seen what can happen now, and the bears are coming. There's nowhere else to go. They climb over the cliff. Well, Zal looks inside one of the fissures that have been worn into the rocks by the rain, and we've set up a number of things through the book so that we're not surprised when he's able to spot a weakness there. And he realizes, okay, if I can capitalize on the weakness, maybe I can make this whole cliff come down. Of course, he's able to do so. Now he's falling, and it crushes that army. So to play out that combat, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chapters really to get from beginning to end. And I would argue I really started setting it up in chapter 16. So because we're getting the march up into the mountains and stuff and starting to see the stakes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters to sort of tell the whole story of this battle. I set it up. I told you what the units were. I made sure the reader is aware of who's fighting and what their capabilities are. I ratcheted up the stakes throughout the entirety of the combat. It's getting worse and worse and worse until we're positive the hero's going to die. But of course they don't. And then, of course, that's the end of the combat. So this is a rough look at what it takes to write a fantasy combat. This is not even close to everything that I would need to teach you about it, but hopefully this has sparked some questions and given you some of the basics. So please, in the comments of this video, if you don't mind, I would love it if you would ask whatever questions you might have about how to plot a fantasy battle. It requires a lot of world building, a lot of preparation, but it's so much fun to write this stuff. Anyway, guys, I do need to get back to the writing, and I will see you next week.